Comair Chief Executive Erik Venter has dismissed ideas of a decrease in the airline ticket prices if there's an entrant in the new airline market. Well, we certainly know that a company called Skywise is coming in, or we were told that on this program, by Wayne Duvenage, better known as the man behind Outer. Erik, is the if and the what and the buts, is that all behind us? Are you preparing now for a new entrant?
Well, look, we expect that somebody's going to come in. There's always a new entrant within a few months of a previous demise, so I think it's inevitable. We are a bit mystified as to how anyone's going to manage to cut airfares at this stage without going out of business fairly quickly. So, of course, it can be done, but that'll imply that it's not sustainable. So, at the moment, Kulula has just introduced a new fleet, which is about the most efficient that one can possibly get for a operation of this size. The systems that we've introduced recently have increased efficiency on the operations side to about as far as we can push them, and yet we're still only left with about 40 Rand a passenger profit on Kulula, and that's required basically to pay off the funding on the aircraft. So there's just really isn't much more to squeeze out of the system at this stage unless we can get the fuel price down dramatically. So in the absence of operating costs coming down, there just isn't any space to cut airfares any further at this point in time.
40 Rand a passenger is very, very low margins, but you've put it to good account. The trading update that was released today is extremely positive. Yeah.
Now look, it has gone well, and like I said, the efficiencies we've got from the new aircraft and the new systems have really made a difference. But I wouldn't say it's a norm for the industry. I think we have achieved something of a differentiation in our operating structure now compared to most airlines, especially in South Africa. And that's not easy to repeat very quickly. So I think we're going to be in a fairly unique position in terms of our operation model for now, especially the kind of investment we've made in owning new aircraft, whereas most operators coming into the market will end up leasing older aircraft and therefore at a much higher cost, both operating cost and ultimately long-term ownership cost.
The trading update does justify the current share price, but my goodness, it's been a performer, up 99%, according to my numbers here on BizNews in the last year. 99%, a doubling, virtually. Well, surely that's got to be hard to repeat.
I think it's still substantially undervalued potentially. If you look at the PE ratio, I mean, the earnings are only for half a year, and so for a full year, you know, we're still looking at a very low PE ratio.
Around 5, that is low.
It's very low.
Are you able then, I suppose the big question is to keep the profits at this level?
Look, it's an interesting industry. Things go from bad to worse very quickly in this environment. But I think we've created a certain level of stability, particularly with the new fleet. You know, the previous fleet was very prone to the fuel price, whereas the new fleet is actually much more resilient to the fuel price movements. And that'll certainly give us a good buffer, you know, far more so than what you'd get out of hedging and hoping to get it right on the hedging program. So I think we've addressed a much more fundamental approach to managing our fuel costs, and hopefully that'll give us a better stability.
How does it work with fuel costs for yourselves, for airlines? Do you get the increase like the rest of us do in the country once a month, or is it on a daily basis?
It's actually on a weekly. Well, it depends on the fuel supplier. The majority of them are now doing it on a weekly basis, and there are one or two that are doing it bi-weekly still. But it's pretty rapid and very much real time. It is almost identical to the paraffin price. So if you follow the paraffin price, you can follow the jet fuel price. But the real shocker, of course, is that in 2010 we were sitting on 4 Rand a litre. We're now sitting on around 9 Rand a litre on jet fuel. So that's been a 225% increase. And, that's what's really driven up the airfares in the last 2 years. But the amazing thing is if you take the total average airfares in the domestic market, despite this massive increase in the last 2 years, we're still sitting with about a 15% increase over 2001. Now, of course, a big contributor to that is the low-cost carriers coming into the market. But I think there are very few products in the world that have managed to get away with only a 15% average increase over 12, 13 years.
I think the guys at SAB will tell you that they managed to do that through higher volumes.
Yes, well, that's really the same model.
Same model.
It's really the same model. You know, we've got much higher seating density, higher aircraft utilization, and bigger aircraft. And that really has been the model. It's volume. It's just a volume model.
Erik, just to close off with, if the new competitor comes in, are you then going to be forced to cut your own airfares, even though you say there isn't really room for it?
I think it depends very much on what the suppliers are prepared to give in terms of credit. If what happened if the last two competitors went out of the market, they ended up with massive debt, and suppliers just kept giving them credit over a much longer period than we ever anticipated. So I would imagine that suppliers are a little bit more wary this time around, and so when the cash actually runs out, it actually runs out, and that's the end of the business. It's not a case where they build up a year's worth of additional debt before they go out of business. And if that's the case, they're going to have to operate at a positive cash flow, and as such, they'll have to charge airfares that are actually recouping their costs, in which case it'll have very little effect on the rest of the industry, because that's kind of where we're sitting in the industry right now. We've actually got more capacity in the domestic market now than when one time was operating in the market. Manga's increased by 33%, Comair's increased by around 18% in capacity. So we're sitting with more capacity than before, and we're sitting with 5% less passengers. So there's a lot of unutilized capacity in the market already, and there's strong competition between Kulula and Manga, particularly at the bottom end, to try and keep that capacity full. So there really isn't much scope at this stage to cut things further without simply creating unsustainable business and putting somebody out of business again.